Conclave by Robert Harris. Part 1. The Sudden Departure. Cardinal Lomeli, the gaunt dean of the College of Cardinals, awoke in the dead of night, his heart heavy with dread. The urgent summons from the prefect of the papal household could only mean one thing. He hurried through the Vatican, praying for the Pope's recovery. But the ambulance waiting outside the Casa Santa Marta, the Pope's humble residence, told a different story. It was not there for a sick man, but for a body. Inside the papal apartment, a solemn gathering awaited. The foremost senior cardinals, Bellini, the intellectual Secretary of State, Tremblay, the dynamic Camerlengo, Adeyemi, the imposing Cardinal Major Penitentiary, and Lomeli himself, knelt by the Pope's deathbed. As Adeyemi intoned the liturgy, Lomeli's mind drifted back to his last audience with the Pope, their parting chilled by Lomeli's desire to resign and the Pope's firm refusal. With the prayers concluded, the ritual of succession began. Tremblay, ever efficient, declared sede vacante as he ceremoniously broke the Pope's fisherman's ring. A carefully constructed timeline of the Pope's final hours was prepared for the media, every detail scrutinized to avoid the kind of rumors that had plagued the Church for decades. Adeyemi pushed for transparency, wanting the world to know of the Pope's unwavering commitment to his duties. Lomeli, ever the diplomat, sought a middle ground, sensing the undercurrents of ambition already surfacing in the room. The first signs of the contest for succession were subtle. Tremblay insisted on a swift transfer of the body, wanting to control the narrative. Adeyemi favored a more dignified approach. Bellini, grieving, seemed lost in memories of his time spent with the Pope. And Lomeli, burdened with the task of managing the conclave, yearned for the peace of prayer that had eluded him. As they stood by the ambulance, the stark humility of the Pope's body, shrouded in a simple white bag, seemed to speak volumes. Yet the flashing lights and the sirens of the departing motorcade spoke of another kind of power, the kind Lomeli knew would consume them all in the days to come. Later, in the hushed sitting room of the papal apartment, Bellini confided in Lomeli, revealing the Pope's growing disillusionment. What he had lost faith in was the Church, he murmured, the words echoing in the quiet room. The revelation haunted Lomeli as he prepared for the ordeal ahead. Part 2. Gathering the Flock. On a Sunday, nearly 3 weeks after the Pope's death, Lomeli stood in the Sistine Chapel, surveying the chaotic scene. Workmen hammered and drilled, preparing the hallowed space for the conclave. O'Malley, the bluff secretary of the college, and Mandorf, the meticulous master of papal liturgical celebrations, flanked him. Lomeli, remembering the grandeur of past conclaves, couldn't help but feel a twinge of nostalgia for the discarded traditions. He tested the cardinals' seating arrangements, examined the stoves for burning the ballots and releasing the iconic smoke signals, and paused in the Room of Tears, the small sacristy where the new pope would be robed. The plain white cassocks, the simple red shoes, spoke of the humility their late pope had embodied. But as the din of construction echoed around him, Lomeli felt a growing sense of unease. This was supposed to be a sacred space, yet it felt more like a building site, a jarring reflection of the chaos Lomeli feared was brewing within the church itself. That afternoon, as Lomeli stood outside the Casa Santa Marta to welcome the arriving cardinals, the sounds of protest from beyond the Vatican walls drifted on the cold air. A helicopter buzzed overhead, a reminder of the world's scrutiny. The cardinals came in their everyday black cassocks with red trim, each carrying the weight of his nation, his faction, his ambitions. Lomeli greeted them with practiced warmth, memorizing faces and names, trying to gauge the shifting currents of support. Sá, the charismatic Brazilian, and Treacherous, the elderly Chilean, embodied the irreconcilable divide between the liberals and the traditionalists. Krasinski, the gleeful American, wielded his cane like a weapon, eager to undo the work of the late Pope. Adeyemi arrived with his entourage of African cardinals, their deference to him palpable. And Bellini, the favorite, appeared burdened by the prospect of the papacy, confiding in Lomeli, "It's not something I desire." As each cardinal entered the Casa Santa Marta, now a sealed-off bunker, Lomeli's sense of foreboding grew. He yearned for the peace of prayer, but his mind was consumed by the task ahead. He was the manager, responsible for ensuring the smooth running of the conclave. Just before the doors closed, Archbishop Wozniak, the Pope's former prefect of the papal household, sought Lomeli out, reeking of alcohol and desperation. He revealed a secret. At his final meeting with the Pope, Tremblay was dismissed. Lomeli, already burdened, dismissed Wozniak's story as the ramblings of a grief-stricken man. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The arrival of Cardinal Benitez, the unknown Archbishop of Baghdad, created another stir. He had been created in pector, in the heart. His name kept secret, even from Lomeli. Bellini confirmed the appointment, although he admitted to advising against it. Benitez, a slight, exhausted figure, seemed bewildered by his sudden elevation. Lomeli, sensing the late Pope's hand in this, assigned O'Malley the task of looking after Benitez and retreated to his room to rest. He woke from a troubled sleep to hear voices, African cardinals talking in English. Later, as he prepared for the momentous Mass in St. Peter's, he found himself unable to pray. The familiar words and rituals felt hollow, his own faith a distant echo. He was a manager, yes, but a manager tasked with overseeing a sacred election he felt increasingly unqualified to handle. Part 3. The Sermon and the First Ballot. The cardinals, a sea of scarlet, processed into the illuminated vastness of St. Peter's, where a congregation of 20,000 awaited. Lomeli, burdened by his vestments and his anxieties, felt disembodied, a puppet enacting a role he did not understand. As he began the Mass, his voice faltered. The readings, the chants, the rituals washed over him without meaning. He was aware of the cameras, the crowds, the weight of the world's expectations. But then, as he rose to deliver his homily, something shifted. He set aside his prepared text, a string of bland platitudes, and began to speak from the heart. He spoke of St. Paul, of the diversity of the Church, of the need for tolerance and humility, and most shockingly of all, he spoke of doubt. My brothers and sisters, let me tell you that the one sin I have come to fear more than any other is certainty. Our faith is a living thing precisely because it walks hand in hand with doubt. The basilica was utterly still. Lomeli felt a surge of energy, a clarity he had not experienced in years. As he continued the Mass, the presence of the Holy Spirit was palpable. He had done something unexpected. Even to himself, he had spoken the truth. The cardinals returned to the Casa Santa Marta in a state of subdued excitement. Lomeli, expecting praise for his boldness, found himself greeted with unease. The liberals applauded him, but the traditionalists, led by Tedesco, frowned. He was accused of ambition, of attempting to manipulate the conclave. He retreated to his room, praying for guidance, but found himself consumed by doubt. Had he spoken truly, or had God spoken through him? That afternoon, they boarded the buses for the first ballot. As the coach traversed the Vatican courtyards, Lomeli sensed the growing weight of responsibility. He felt the gaze of his colleagues, the scrutiny of the world. The air in the Sistine Chapel was thick with anticipation. After the swearing of the oath, the cardinals began to vote, each one reciting the same formula. I call as my witness Christ the Lord, who will be my judge, that my vote is given to the one who before God I think should be elected. Lomeli cast his vote for Bellini, as did Benitez, to Lomeli's surprise. The counting of the ballots was a long, slow process. Each name echoed through the Sistine, a testament to the divisions within the Church. As predicted, the race was close. But Lomeli, to his dismay, received 5 votes, enough, at least in theory, to make him a contender. The first ballot yielded no clear winner. Tedesco 22, Adeyemi 19, Bellini 18, Tremblay 16, Lomeli 5, others 38. As they gathered in the vestibule to watch the burning of the ballots, Lomeli confided in O'Malley, revealing his concerns about Tremblay and asking him to investigate further. The Irishman, ever discreet, promised to make inquiries. The black smoke billowed from the Sistine chimney, signaling the deadlock to the world. Part 4. Shifting alliances and a shocking discovery. That evening, over dinner, the real work of the conclave began. Although forbidden by the rules, the cardinals maneuvered and canvassed, seeking to build alliances and shift votes. Sabadin, Bellini's de facto campaign manager, was rattled by the disappointing first ballot. He laid out the strategy: win over the undecided and prevent Tedesco from securing a blocking minority. Lomeli, troubled by his own tally, pledged to support Bellini and asked the others to do the same. Tremblay circulated with practiced charm, his blandness a strange counterpoint to his obvious ambition. Adeyemi held court, radiating a growing sense of destiny, and Benitez, seated with the Anglophones, continued to intrigue Lomeli. As the evening wore on, Lomeli, troubled by his encounter with Wozniak, sought out the leading contenders, urging them to distance themselves from him. Tremblay denied any wrongdoing, dismissing Wozniak's accusations as the ramblings of a drunk. Bellini seemed relieved to be losing ground, hoping the chalice might pass to Lomeli. Adeyemi, confident and charismatic, assured Lomeli, "You have my support." He returned to his room, haunted by the whispers and anxieties he had witnessed. As he lay in bed, unable to sleep, he heard voices through the thin wall. Adeyemi and a woman. He dismissed his suspicions as absurd. But the next morning, as the cardinals gathered for Mass, he saw a nun, her face pale and drawn, hurrying away from Adeyemi's room. He tried to ignore the incident, but as he stood in the breakfast queue, he heard a crash, a scream, and saw a nun fleeing the dining hall. Adeyemi vanished. 3 African cardinals approached Lomeli, their faces grim. "Something is wrong," they said. Lomeli followed the trail of whispers to Sister Agnes's office. The nun, Shinumi, sat trembling, her gaze fixed on the floor. Only when Lomeli offered to hear her confession did she reveal the truth. 30 years earlier, as a young postulant in Nigeria, she had been seduced by Adeyemi. She had borne his child, a son given up for adoption. Seeing Adeyemi in the Casa Santa Marta, her hopes for some kind of acknowledgement rekindled. She had sought him out. He had rejected her. In her despair, she had spoken out. Lomeli, horrified, confronted Adeyemi. The Nigerian, his dream of the papacy crumbling, confessed his sin. He had repented, he insisted. He had asked for forgiveness. He was a changed man. But Lomeli was unwavering. "You cannot be Pope," he said. "You cannot be anything." He returned to the Sistine Chapel, burdened by the knowledge of Adeyemi's secret and the weight of his own actions. The second ballot confirmed what he already knew. Adeyemi's support had collapsed. He prayed for guidance, but the numbers were clear. Tremblay, the beneficiary of Adeyemi's downfall, was surging ahead. Lomeli, to his dismay, saw his own tally rising. He was caught in a dilemma. To continue supporting Bellini seemed futile, but to endorse Tremblay felt like a betrayal of everything he believed in. As black smoke billowed from the chimney, Lomeli sensed the world's growing impatience. He needed a solution, and fast. Part 5. A Secret Unveiled. A City Under Siege. The 4th and 5th ballots confirmed the new reality. Adeyemi was finished, and the race had become a contest between Tedesco and Tremblay. Lomeli, his own tally creeping upwards, found himself the object of increasingly anxious scrutiny. He was the wild card, the unknown quantity, the potential kingmaker. But he was also, increasingly, a contender himself. After dinner, he sought out Benitez, hoping to persuade him to support Tremblay. The Filipino, sitting in his candlelit room, surprised Lomeli with his serenity. He did not fear a prolonged conclave. He believed in God, not the institution of the church. "I cannot vote for a man unless he is worthy," he said, and he refused to abandon his support for Lomeli. That night, Lomeli lay awake, consumed by his conversation with Benitez. Had he been serving the wrong master all these years? The whispers of ambition, so easily dismissed before, now echoed in his mind. He picked up the pass key Sister Agnes had given him and stared at it. He knew what he had to do. He left his room and made his way to the sealed-off papal apartment. He broke the seals, entered the sitting room, and sat at the Pope's desk. He found nothing. He opened the bedroom door, his gaze drawn to the massive, ugly Renaissance bed that had been the Pope's only concession to grandeur. He knelt by it and prayed. And then, as if guided by an unseen hand, he began to examine the bedposts. He found a hidden compartment in the first post, and inside it, a wooden box containing documents. Financial records, bank statements, apartment allocations, all annotated with the Pope's meticulous handwriting. Lomeli's own name appeared, along with those of Bellini, Adeyemi, Tremblay, and dozens of other cardinals. He felt soiled merely reading it, yet he could not stop himself. The Holy Father, in his final days, had been obsessed with the corruption within the Church. He discovered similar boxes hidden in the other bedposts, each one containing a different kind of revelation. Private emails, telephone transcripts, reports from investigators. The sheer scale of it overwhelmed him. The Holy Father, in his war with the Curia, had become a spy in his own house. He took the most damning document, a report into Tremblay's financial dealings with cardinals from the developing world, and left the apartment. He went to Bellini's room and woke him, his mind reeling. "You broke the seals?" Bellini stared at him in horror. "What choice did I have?" Lomeli laid out the evidence. "Tremblay is guilty of simony." Bellini, after reading the report, urged Lomeli to destroy it. "Think of the damage it would do to the church," he pleaded. Lomeli, sickened by Bellini's weakness, left the room. A few hours later, as the cardinals gathered for breakfast, Lomeli put his plan into action. He had 118 copies of the Tremblay report printed and delivered to the dining room. As he sat at a table, waiting for the storm to break, Sister Agnes entered the room and addressed the cardinals. "I know why the dean entered the Holy Father's rooms," she said. She confirmed Lomeli's suspicions. Shinumi had been brought to Rome at Tremblay's request. Tremblay, his face ashen, denied any malicious intent. "I acted on behalf of the Holy Father," he insisted. But Adeyemi, his deep voice booming, denounced him. "Judas!" Lomeli, watching the conclave unravel, felt a dreadful sense of responsibility. He had broken the rules, but he had also exposed the truth. Now it was up to God to guide them through the chaos he had unleashed. The cardinals boarded the buses for the sixth ballot, the air thick with tension. As Lomeli stood by the window, O'Malley whispered in his ear, "I assume the conclave is unlikely to reach a decision today." Lomeli knew he was right. The numbers were clear. He prayed for a miracle, but the only answer he received was the relentless drumming of the bus tires against the cobbles. He entered the Sistine Chapel, his mind in turmoil. He voted for Bellini, knowing it was futile. As the cardinals cast their ballots, the sounds of the world crept in. Sirens, helicopters, the distant murmur of pilgrims gathering in St. Peter's Square. Exhausted, Lomeli fell asleep at his desk. He woke to find a note from Bellini, and behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, but he was asleep. He scribbled a reply. "I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me." The sixth ballot yielded another shock. Tedesco 45, Lomeli 40, Benitez 19, Bellini 9, Tremblay 3, Adeyemi 2. Tedesco had his blocking minority. The conclave was deadlocked, and Lomeli, to his horror, was now the main obstacle to Tedesco's victory. As the cardinals whispered and schemed, Lomeli prayed for guidance. Who should he vote for? He did not want the papacy, but could he in good conscience stand aside and let Tedesco win? He picked up his ballot paper and wrote, Lomeli. As he placed his vote in the urn, a deafening explosion shook the chapel. The windows shattered, the air filled with the screams of sirens. A bomb had gone off, just outside the Vatican walls. Lomeli, terrified and elated, staggered to the vestibule. He barred the entry of security men, determined to maintain the integrity of the conclave. "We are as safe in the Sistine Chapel as anywhere on earth," he declared, his voice trembling. He addressed the cardinals. Should they suspend the conclave or continue? Tedesco, ever opportunistic, urged them to vote. "We shall best show the world the strength of our faith if we refuse to be intimidated," he declared. Bellini, ashen-faced, agreed. They must choose a pope. Lomeli, his mind reeling, prayed for a sign. He voted again for Lomeli. As the cardinals filed past him, he prayed for each one. He prayed for Adeyemi, ruined. He prayed for Tremblay, disgraced. He prayed for Bellini, defeated. He prayed for Tedesco, triumphant. He prayed for Benitez, serene. And he prayed for himself. And he prayed for himself, his soul burdened by the weight of his choices. As the seventh ballot was counted, the sounds of the world pressed in. Sirens, helicopters, the murmur of the crowd. Lomeli, unable to bear the tension, shut his eyes. He opened them to the inescapable numbers. Lomeli 52, Tedesco 42, Benitez 24. He was in front. God help him, he was going to be pope. Part 6, the eighth ballot and a final revelation. The cardinals, stunned by the seventh ballot, gathered in the Casa Santa Marta to hear the news from the outside world. The Piazza del Risorgimento had been attacked. There were dead and wounded in Rome, in Munich, in Louvain. "We are under attack all across Europe," O'Malley said grimly. Lomeli, holding the casualty list, addressed the cardinals. Tedesco, sensing the shifting mood, urged them to choose a strong leader. "We need to hold fast to our values," he declared. Benitez, his voice soft but firm, spoke of the need for love and forgiveness. Not one of them would have wished to see violence met by violence, he said. His words resonated, and the conclave, as if guided by a single will, decided to return to the Sistine Chapel. As they walked together, Adeyemi began to sing, his magnificent voice lifting their spirits. Lomeli, his mind cleared by the shared purpose, felt a sense of peace he had not known before. He was ready to accept whatever God willed. They entered the Sistine Chapel and prepared for the 8th ballot. Lomeli, looking down at his blank ballot paper, knew he could not vote for himself. He had seen the consequences of ambition, of certainty. He glanced around the room, and then in a firm hand, he wrote, Benitez. As the cardinals filed past him to vote, Lomeli studied the apostolic constitution, rehearsing the rituals of succession. He imagined himself standing before Benitez, asking the fateful question, "Do you accept your canonical election as Supreme Pontiff?" And then, his mind drifting, he pictured himself being asked the same question. He would refuse, of course. But if by some miracle he were to accept, he knew what name he would choose: John. Pope John XIV. The counting of the ballots was a slow, agonizing process. But as the tally mounted, Lomeli felt a growing sense of inevitability. He tore up the notes for his speech. This was not his destiny. The final results were undeniable. Benitez 92, Lomeli 21, Tedesco 5. Benitez, the quiet, unassuming Filipino, had become pope. As the cardinals applauded, Lomeli approached Benitez. He asked the fateful question. Benitez, his face pale, hesitated. Lomeli, fearing a refusal, urged him to accept God's will. Finally, Benitez spoke. "I accept." "And by what name do you wish to be called?" "Innocent." The choice of name, so unexpected, resonated through the Sistine. Pope Innocent XIV, the embodiment of hope and humility. Lomeli knelt in homage, and Benitez, smiling, pulled him to his feet. He asked Lomeli to continue as dean. Lomeli, relieved, agreed. As Mandorf began to draw up the deed of acceptance, Lomeli noticed O'Malley. The Irishman was staring at the document, his face contorted. "What is it?" "I have a great burden on my conscience," O'Malley whispered, his voice trembling. Lomeli's heart sank. "What now?" "Cardinal Benitez told me. He never shaves." Lomeli, confused, stared at him. "But now, with this clinic in Switzerland," O'Malley's voice trailed away. "What clinic?" "It specializes in gender reassignment." Lomeli rushed to the sacristy, where Benitez was being robed. He dismissed the tailor and Zanetti, and confronted the new pope. "You must tell me about this treatment," he demanded. Benitez, to Lomeli's surprise, seemed more amused than alarmed. He explained. He had been born with a physical deformity that had allowed him to live as a man. He had only discovered the truth after being injured in Baghdad. He had considered surgery, but had decided against it. He was what God had made him. "The Holy Father knew," Benitez said. "Then he must have gone mad." Lomeli cried. There was a knock at the door. Santini, the senior cardinal deacon, entered. "When would you like me to announce your election?" he asked. Lomeli, his mind reeling, stalled for time. "How many people know?" he asked Benitez when Santini had gone. "Only we 3, Benitez replied. "And God." The 2 cardinals emerged from the sacristy. Benitez, radiating warmth and humility, embraced his colleagues. The conclave was over. The church had a new leader. As O'Malley lit the stoves, releasing the white smoke into the darkening sky, Lomeli watched the distant glow of the searchlight reflected in the shadows of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. A moment later, a roar echoed through the broken windows. The sound of 250,000 voices raised in hope and celebration. If you enjoyed this book breakdown, please consider liking this video and subscribing to get notified when we post our next breakdown.